and take a minute here to introduce our speaker for today. So Jeff Russell is the co-director of Russell Consulting, and he specializes in helping companies successfully respond to the challenges of continuous change. With a focus on leadership development, strategic planning, change management, and performance coaching, Jeff helps organizations achieve their goals. Jeff received his master's degree in industrial relations with the UW-Madison, where he teaches for the Department of Continuing Education and Professional Studies, the Small Business Development Center, and the School of Engineering. So with that, I would be happy to turn this over to Jeff.
Well, good morning, everybody. Again, thanks, Kristen. My name is Jeff Russell, and I'm going to be your guide for the next hour, kind of moving us through this whole topic of some of the keys to, excuse me, to employee retention. And first of all, I just want to acknowledge that this is a rather unusual time, as you all know, and I hope that you're coping well with the challenges that you face personally and in your business. And I think it's also kind of useful and productive to talk about the context of the current epidemic and its impact on our businesses in the context of employee retention. So I'll have a couple of references in our session this morning. But feel free to, to weigh in with your own perceptions and observations of how our current challenges may influence the issue of retention going forward. Just want to highlight my street cred of what gives me the ability to kind of be here to talk about this stuff. My business and life partner and I, Linda, have been doing this work for about 30 years, working with a variety of organizations, public, private, social, international, global, as well as kind of very regional. Previously, prior to starting my own business with Linda, I worked as an HR manager for a large state agency. And the both of us have authored 9 books on such topics as employee engagement, leading change, strategic planning, and most recently, Fearless Performance Reviews published by McGraw-Hill. And I presented previous sessions for the Chamber over the years on topics such as strategic planning, employee engagement, self-management, performance reviews, and so forth. So I've always appreciated the working with the Chamber. The audiences, the members are always very engaged and involved, and I've appreciated those experiences. Just want to highlight our brief agenda for this morning. So we're going to start off by talking about, kind of exploring your experience of why employees leave or stay. So what are your own experience, what are the factors that influence those decision-making that employees make? From there, we'll move into, excuse me, an overview of some of the key drivers of employee retention, some big macro kind of perspectives. Then we'll do a deeper dive into some key tips for retaining employees. And we'll specifically talk about the impact of supervision or managers on employee retention, the role that they play in shaping the employee's experience. And the last thing we'll talk about is the kind of, well, the last 2 things actually is a little bit on emotional intelligence and why that matters, particularly in supervisors. And then finally, as time permits, we'll touch briefly on the whole notion of stay interviews as one way to stay connected to your employees to ensure that they're more likely to stay than go. So that's kind of the broader agenda for this morning. And again, my hope is that this is a very interactive session. You'll have a chance to weigh in with your own thoughts and perspectives and questions. And please use the chat, audio, or video to kind of interact with me. So first of all, I want to share some results from the Gallup survey, and these statistics kind of change from year to year, but they stay pretty steady as well, pretty constant. So when we think about like the level of employee engagement in our companies today, about 30% come to work fully engaged. They bring their creativity, their passion, their desire. They're all invested in helping create value for your company and your customers. Another 52%, a troubling percentage, are disengaged, where they leave some of their talent, their perspective, their passion at the door. They're not bringing everything they could to create value for your customers or the company. And then finally, we have the 18% who are actively disengaged, and they prefer to work elsewhere. They're more than happy to collect the paycheck, but are not bringing much talent, much creativity, much passion, and the limited amount of value that they bring, it may be more troubling than contributing to your company's success. So one of the things that's useful here is if we think about engagement, the 30% are fully engaged, these three buckets here. The first bucket, 30% fully engaged. So on day one, when people start working for your company, they kind of start in this bucket, right? Everyone starts their career, their job in this place of, I got the job, I'm excited, I want to bring value, I want to make a contribution, I like the work that I do. But staying at that level requires energy, it requires an investment, it requires an ongoing commitment by the company and the employee in creating the value proposition that they transform into their work. So it takes some energy to stay at this level. And over time, every day, employees at this level make a decision. Do I stay at this level, bring all that energy and creativity, or do I drift down to a lower level of engagement? And I think this isn't necessarily intentional. It's just a gradual devolution of commitment and engagement. So we move into the second bucket, the actively disengaged. Here we have a chance to bring people back, right? So we have ability to build engagement, return them to full engagement. They are not so far gone that we can't find a way to reconnect them to their work, the company, their customers. And then we have the 18% who are actively disengaged. And we may not be able to reach them. Too much history has occurred. It may be an attitude issue. They may feel maligned or mistreated, and they essentially pull back and withdraw. And we may not be able to re-engage them. So here's my first question of our morning. So what's our strategy for each of these three types of employees? So what's our strategy when we think about issue of retention? What's our strategy for the 30% who are fully engaged? Any thoughts about that? Again, on audio, video, or chat, what's your perceptions? For the 30% fully engaged, what's our strategy?
Got a quiet group, Jeff.
Yeah. Any takers?
Ken Wondrow here. My feeling was with the 30% fully engaged, especially in the company we worked in, it was key to keep them engaged and not just to let them drift away from you. So you had to employ things that maybe centered more activity with them, that to keep them fully engaged, as opposed to drifting over the other side, being disengaged, had them work with people who might have been a little bit disengaged to pull them more back in, to continue giving responsibilities, but not to burn them out, not to overwork them.
I think that's a really good point. I think that we tend to sometimes take full advantage of the fully engaged folks and take them for granted. So I think Ken's point is well taken about continue to stay engaged with them, be invested in their success, exploring their interests, and ensuring that their job continues to be satisfying and rewarding. We never take that for granted. And the chamber itself weighs in, continuing to allow employees to contribute to the success of the organization. So give them opportunities, again, to bring that value, that passion, that desire to contribute. Keep leveraging that, keep honoring that. So I think the key thing is to not take that 30% group for granted. We recognize that every day they make a decision to stay at that level of contribution and value creation, or to withdraw from that. And again, most of the time it's not conscious, but eventually it's like, if I keep working so hard and I don't get much recognition or appreciation or celebration of those, then why should I do it? So partly it's recognition, celebration, acknowledging their contribution. And then Laura is weighing in. I think we tend to almost ignore the fully engaged group, yes, because we're afraid to ruin that relationship, or we simply take them for granted. Again, we don't spend enough time with this group. Yeah, we just assume that they are innately passionate about their work, and I think that's probably true. But if we don't continue to invest in their positive employee experience, then that can drift down into, well, if I work so hard and I don't get much out of it, why should I work so hard? What about the 52% engaged group? What do we do with this group here? What do we do with the 52% disengaged group? Any takers there?
Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah. This is more of a question than as a statement, but I feel that I think a lot of businesses are lacking strong engagement feedback questions to actually start that conversation with an employee that's disengaged. There's a lot of templates out there that, like your review questions, what you're measuring for an employee's review, but to actually kind of start that conversation and ask the right questions to understand what has caused them to become disengaged so that you can re-engage them.
That's exactly right. That's the conversation we need to have. So, we could say, our observation is that, for the first 3 years you worked here, I saw you doing this, I saw you doing that. I've seen that lately you pull back a little bit. What's going on? Tell me more about, has something about the job changed? Are we not creating the kind of opportunities that you were looking for? So having that conversation is the most important conversation we have to get that disengaged group back to telling us what they need. Now, again, it's not our job to get them engaged. It's the choices they make that make that happen. At the same time, if the things that we're doing or not doing that's becoming a barrier to that full engagement, then we need to be aware of that.
Can I add to that?
Go ahead.
One of the things that I've observed is that those people that are disengaged still want to be, I think the previous speaker said it, they need to be reviewed. They want to be reviewed. They want feedback. And a lot of times the employer is no longer giving them feedback. When they do reviews, they tend to push it off onto someone else, a lesser person in the organization that's just going to talk to them. Or they do the mistake of using a template where it's just almost yes or no questions. Or the rating 1 to 5. How have you done last year? Oh, I'll give you a 4. I'll give you a 5. It doesn't give any true feedback to that employee. What the review needs to do is go more towards open-ended questions, so it strikes up a discussion where that employee then feels like they're truly being listened to, and it's pulling them back into the engagement. And it gives them a chance to better understand what it is. That's where you can open up that conversation about, boy, I saw you as really active 2 years ago, and lately you've just become less and less active. What is it that this firm can do or this business can do that brings you back in?
Exactly right. I think anytime we can engage employees in that conversation, whether it's in the formal kind of performance review conversation or the regular check-in conversations that are central to building that relationship, it's engaging them and kind of having them tell us in an open-ended kind of way, what are the challenges they face? What are the passions that they have? What are the unleveraged talents that they would like to bring to the job? Is this the kind of work that they are interested in? And at the last part of our session, we'll talk about, the stay interview or the retention interview or the engagement interview. And that's really so critical to have that awareness of what their expectations are of the work environment. Again, it's not our obligation to get them re-engaged. It's the choice they make. Every employee is responsible for his or her own success and level of engagement. But if we're not oblivious to that, then we can't do what we are able to do to influence those choices people are making. The last of our group, the 18%, this bucket, What's our strategy for this group? I know what you're thinking. What's our strategy?
I'm gonna say that, I mean, your first impulse is, well, they should be left go. I think that you owe them a little bit more than that. It's possible that they're misplaced within the organization, that they're doing something they really didn't want to do. They just came on board because it was a job, and that's all you gave them was a job. You didn't really give them a role within the firm, and you certainly didn't place them properly. In the firm that I was in, we always talked about back office, front office, because we were a people service oriented business, but we needed support staff. Every once in a while, you'd find someone who was put as a people person who really wasn't. They didn't want to be face to face. They wanted to be in the background. They worked much better if they had a project to do. At the same time, we put people in the back office that was drudgery work. And they just hung around until something better came along. So I think as the employer, if you want to keep them, the first thing you got to try to do is get a better place. If that doesn't work, then maybe the conversation is, where would you rather be?
Again, and Ken, I agree with you. And I think to paraphrase Disney, maybe we need to help them find their happiness elsewhere. If they're not happy here.
Right.
Laura says we have no strategy. We just we let them kind of self-select out. I think the key thing is that there's a reason people moved into this bottom category. We need to know that reason. The earlier we know that reason, the easier it is to turn them around. So we catch them when they're at the 52% disengaged and get them re-engaged, as opposed to the 18% who are fully disengaged. It may be too far down the road. And it's great to have that conversation and bring them back in. But at this point, the lack of trust, the lack of communication, the lack of engagement is a huge barrier to their ability to be willing to kind of come back in and give it another shot. So we may not have a lot of options here. We still need to reach out, have a conversation, but actually we should have had the conversation much sooner than this. To Ken's point, if there wasn't an alignment between their passion and their skills and the job that they're in, we should have known that early on, either at the point of hiring or early on as they sorted themselves out what their passions really were versus the job they were in. Having those conversations earlier rather than later, before it is too late, is really central to a successful re-engagement strategy. Okay, so this is, I think, a great place to start as we jump into the balance of our kind of agenda here. Let's look at some broader questions. So again, large group on the next page. If everybody should have in front of them the handouts, and I meant to reference those early on. We're on page 1 of the handouts. Why do people stay or go? And so what causes people to leave their jobs in your experience? What causes people to stay with their jobs and with their companies? What are some of the factors that influence that decision making? And then we're going to get into what the research says, and then my top 11 tips. So what are your thoughts? What causes people to leave, or what causes people to stay? Again, this is on page 2 of the handouts. Well, people leave because they feel unappreciated or disconnected. And they stay maybe when they feel connected, and we'll talk more about that. And as Laura says, it's also because of management or supervision, and again, that's going to be a key driver. Anything else that in your experience, why do people leave or why do they stay?
I always found that it was lack of true communication. One of the things that a lot of disgruntled employees told me was that they didn't hear directly from the person who was giving them their review. They didn't hear from the boss. So the boss would tell me, employee A is doing really well. I'm really pleased that they've improved. And I'd say, did you tell that employee? And he goes, sure. The truth was he never did. He told me. I told the employee, and the employee's first response was, oh yeah? What did it look like when he said it? What do you think he really meant? What was his tone? If you don't give direct feedback to these employees that are sitting on the fringe, they get disconnected, and they're waiting for a better offer.
I think that's a really good point, Ken. And again, and we'll talk about that. It kind of in my next page here is what the research tells us really is that if we can create a sense of connectivity and community, and that means from supervisor down to managers to the CEO and to the frontline employee kind of peers, the more we can create a sense of connectedness and community, the less likely people are to leave, and the more likely they'll be engaged and willing to stay. Any other factors that anybody can think of that weighs in at influencing the judgments people form to leave or stay?
Jeff, you've got one more there in the chat that AJ
Okay.
said, people may leave because of the management styles above them. Maybe their roles are being diminished or micromanaged.
Again, it comes back to the boss. And I think the management style, the boss style, the supervisory style, the level of interaction, the micromanagement, or the level of trust and autonomy that people are given, all those are key factors. Very good. So I think the key thing I want to kind of suggest here is that there are a combination of factors that influence this decision to leave or stay, not just one. So yes, communication, community, the boss skills, all those things are factors. There are other factors as well that come into play. It's not just those either positive qualities or negative qualities. It's a combination of factors that influence the decision-making of each person as they make that visceral emotional commitment to stay with the company or to move on in their jobs. Let's really look at what the research says. Go to the next page of our handouts. We are on page 2. So essentially, typically employees choose to leave as one of the key factors is dissatisfaction with some aspect of their work life. It could be, and we've talked about this already, bad managers. It could be a bad fit, and Ken talked a bit about that. Not really a good fit to the work that they're expected to do, or with the culture of the organization, or with their temperament and the temperament of the team, or the entire culture of the company. And coworkers, right? So bad coworkers, at least defined by the employee, they don't get along. There's a lack of sense of community. And again, moving broader to beyond just the coworkers, but the broader community, the place that, do I feel connected to this work environment? Bad salaries and benefits. There are better alternatives available. So it's always a judgment between, there's a level of dissatisfaction that all people experience to varying degrees with the job on any given day. If they see that there are better alternatives elsewhere, they're more likely to leave. If they see that, okay, I'm dissatisfied to some degree, but there aren't really better alternatives out there, that will tend to cause me to kind of pause before I rush to the door. So are there good, reasonable alternatives out there to where I am now? Sometimes it's part of the plan. This was intended to be a short-term transition job for me, and I'm exiting about on my plan. I thought about 2 more years, and then 2 or 3 years, then I'm out. That was kind of part of my larger personal or career plan. Or it could be it's not part of their plan. Either having a child or a spouse gets a job in another city, a health condition, all those factors. It wasn't part of the original thinking, but stuff happens in life, both good or bad. So those are all factors that influence that decision of the employee deciding to leave if these conditions aren't right, there's better alternatives available, it was part of my plan originally, or something happens in my life that changed the equation for me. And kind of, I already hinted at this, in terms of that equation, the decision to leave a company involves a combination of factors, not just one. When these align, then people are more likely to leave. So when the job conditions, the alternatives are available, especially if it was part of their plan, or it wasn't part of the plan, now is the time to leave. There are opportunities available. There's some measure of dissatisfaction, more likely to leave. So it's our task is to figure out what are those variables that are influencing those choices that they're making, especially if we want them to retain them, and then give them an alternative to exiting as a reason to stay. Further down on page 2, what the research says about why employees stay. And the 3 major bullet points here, we're going to revisit these when we get into the 11 steps here in a few minutes. The more employees become embedded in his or her job through a web of connections and relationships, the more likely the employee is to stay, and the less likely he or she is prepared to leave. So this speaks to the need to build community, right? So if we create a web of connectivity, a web of relationships, that they feel to a degree invested in a part of something larger than themselves, they're more likely to stay and less likely to leave. Related to this is if the benefits, rewards, and work environment of the current job is perceived as more favorable than those offered elsewhere. So again, if there's better alternatives elsewhere than the current array of benefits, rewards, and the work environment itself, then people are more likely to leave. So again, it's being aware of, do we have something to offer that's equal to or better than alternatives in the larger environment? And some people just stay because it's easier to stay in their current position than to go through all the effort to quit, to start over someplace else. So inertia isn't a great reason for retention, but it is a variable. It is one of the factors. Inertia is broken if the benefits and rewards and the work environment is seen as diminishing, and the risks are too high for me to stay and be happy. So I might willing to kind of break inertia and move in and take the risk of going elsewhere if my current work environment isn't meeting my expectations and requirements. So kind of coming back to kind of my 3 bullet points here, particularly, this is really key. The more employees are embedded in their jobs, the more they feel themselves as part of a community, the more likely that they will stay. And the more engaged they are in the work that they do, the more likely that they'll want to stick around and do their work with this company. So this is really a critical implication for the way we structure the work environment and the way we invest and intentionally build community to enable people to feel like, yeah, I belong here. This is where I feel welcome. So that gets me to my 3rd retention wisdom bullet point, is building community is the single most important action you can take to improve retention. Yes, there's lots of other things we'll talk about. We're going to get into that next in terms of the 11 top tips. But building community, that sense of connectivity, is really a critical first step. There's some research that suggests that people make a decision emotionally, whether they're willing to stick with this company within the first week or so of working for a place. Do I feel welcome here? And the research is pretty clear that people make those decisions early on in their experience. It may take them 18 months before they actually depart, but early on they form that sense, am I welcome, and do I feel connected to this place? Any comments or reactions to any of this before we get to my 11 retention strategies? Okay, moving along then, let's talk about those. So we're on page 3, and we're going to go on page 3 and 4 of the handouts, and I have some fill in the blanks here to kind of give you a sense of participation. and it requires you to stick through the entire webinar to be part of this. So number one, recruit right. And this involves a couple of things. One involves previews so people know what they're signing up for, but also kind of selling the job as it is, as opposed to an idealized version of it. So making sure that when people make the decision to say, yes, I'm interested in working for you, that they're under the right understanding of what they're signing on for, the job, the company, and the culture. So doing a good job of really clarifying what the environment is that they're coming into. And then looking for the right talent that matches that. And that speaks to the second bullet point here, which is biodata. Biodata is really about the employee's experience and their background, and does that align with the job that they'll be doing? And to what extent is there a good fit? So whether that be, everything from their leadership experience in the past, their educational, their volunteer experience. This is what we call biodata that really contributes to their past behaviors tend to be a good predictor of their future inclinations. So looking at is their past experience a good fit to the work they'll be doing, the culture of the company, the team that they're a part of. And looking at that biodata to make sure there's a good alignment is really a critical step here. Thirdly, onboard employees in the right way. And again, in the first month of employment, we're trying to kind of create that sense of community and build a sense of collaboration and connection, introducing to the larger purpose and where they fit in, introducing themselves to the team and to their, building that sense of community. And that's where the buddy systems or some kind of connection, checking in with the employee on a regular basis, making sure that first month of experience is a positive one. They feel welcome and connected. They understand where they fit in and what's expected of them. And again, feel free to chime in if you have questions or comments on any of these things that particularly resonate with you. We've already talked about creating community. And the faster you can do this, the faster that connectivity occurs, and occurs as well in terms of the onboarding. You start building the community there, but we continue to do so in terms of making sure that people feel welcome, that creating that sense of connectivity with the team. And that means, engaging them in group or social activities within their team, within the company. Making sure that there's clear rewards of being part of that community. And moving on to page 4, building leadership and supervisory skills. And this is really a key. Well, the research is pretty clear. People tend to leave their bosses, not their organizations. So the implications are that we need to invest heavily and appropriately in building the skills of being a good supervisor, being a good manager. We'll talk about some of those things that are most critical here in a few minutes. Number 6, invest in employee learning, growth, and career development. And one of the things that enables people to feel motivated and inspired is that they feel like they're on a path of learning and growth. And the more we can say that we are invested in your future success, not just here in the company, but in your life, the more people tend to be willing to invest in us. Number 7, strengthen the factors that influence employee engagement. And people who are engaged are 5 times less likely to quit. And what that means is that we need to be aware, and coming back to Ken's point about kind of having those conversations on a regular basis to get a sense of what do you want to most create in this work environment? What engages you, what disengages you? What are the factors that influence your decisions every day to be a part of this company and to bring value to this company? So understand what those are and continue to invest in and strengthen those factors for each employee and for the entire team. So I talked a little bit already about that issue about employee learning and growth, but learning and growth is only one element of kind of that motivational environment. In the contemporary approach towards motivation, captured by the book Drive by Daniel Pink, he talks a bit about kind of the three dimensions of what enables people to be motivated. And again, we don't motivate others. Motivation is an internal act. And so our task is to figure out how do we influence each employee to be fully engaged in the work that they do. And it's less about rewards and punishments. And instead, it's about focusing on the three components that influence the level of motivation that people bring to their jobs. The first of these is autonomy, the freedom to choose my own path, to find my own way, to be trusted and be independent, to feel like the company allows me to find my own way to create value. The second of these is meaning. At the end of the day, I want to feel like I do something that matters, that's important, that people care about, that I make a contribution to the company's success or an individual employee, a customer's success, that I make a difference. And then the third component of this, the drive, is growth, which is that I'm on a path of learning, that every day I get a little bit better at being who I want to be, both personally and professionally. The more we can understand what those individual motivators are within each employee, the more likely they are to stay, because they find the environment itself motivating and inspiring. Again, it comes back to Ken's point about staying connected with employees so we understand what lights their fire and what we can do to help create a pathway to enable them to enable and achieve autonomy, find meaning, and experience personal and professional growth. Conducting stay interviews, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes, and then also pulse engagement surveys. And the pulse engagement survey, so we do engagement surveys, we design them, we deploy them for companies, and typically they're about once every year or two. And it's a kind of moment in time where we get a better sense of overall, are people engaged or not? Pulse engagement surveys, they're more frequent, very narrowly focused, capturing maybe 4 or 5 dimensions of the work environment and what's working or what's not. So a pulse survey is more frequent surveys that give us a bead on what's working, what's happening almost in real time. And similarly, the stay interview, which we'll end with this morning, really explores the notion of having that frequent conversation at least once a year, and maybe 2 or 3 times a year, that really talks about what kind of work experience are you having here? Are you staying engaged? Are you getting what you need to be successful, and so forth? And we'll talk more about those, that stay interview or engagement interview here in a few minutes. Number 10, no surprise here that this is a key driver, is that fair and adequate total compensation. Don't let pay be the reason people quit. Again, pay is not the highest on people's list in terms of why they leave. The boss tends to be at the top of that list. At the same time, if it's not fair, if there's inequity in the way that pay is distributed, or it's inadequate, is not meeting my personal or family needs, then that's an influencer. It will shape or affect the person's intention to stay or leave. So don't let those things become the barrier. And what we know about like motivation, again, in Hertzberg, Frederick Hertzberg did some research in the 60s, really looking at the variables that influence the choices people make about just being engaged and being motivated or not. And he found that there were what's called the 2-factor theory. The hygiene, the positive things that people found engaging that caused them to stay were things related to the work environment, autonomy, meaning, growth, and purpose. And the things that caused people to leave or that were that didn't motivate but demotivated were things related to pay and supervision. So what that means is that supervision and pay are not the reasons people come to work, but they are the reasons that can depress people's commitment to work and to do great work. So don't let that be a reason to depress engagement and depress motivation, that total compensation issue. And then finally, in the world of the age of coronavirus, this is, I think, an emerging variable that in the future will be influencing effective retention and engagement, is do people feel safe and do they feel secure? Do they feel like they come to work and that the company is interested in my safety and security, economic and personal? And the degree to which we can provide some measure of assurance on those points of safety and economic security, we're more likely to have them be engaged and have them stay as one of our employees. Again, everything else, all, 1 through 10 are fully supportive of the research. Number 11, I think it's an emergent issue, and we'll just see how critical that is going forward. Back to our retention wisdom, another key point is people don't leave their companies, they leave their bosses. And that really speaks to the next piece on the next page of our handouts, the difference between a good boss and a bad boss. So a bad boss, unclear expectations, no transparency in decision making, setting unrealistic workloads, micromanaging, not appreciating accomplishments, playing favorites, no support, no feedback. Those are the factors that influence people to say, this is not a healthy, supportive, facilitating relationship, and more cause me to exit, to move to the exits. A good boss is really related to, they tend to be highly engaged themselves, and they have a desire and the skills to engage his or her own team. And they care about, they're invested in employees. So let me ask you, what if you were to say that, what are the skills, the competencies we need to develop in our frontline supervisors, our middle-level managers, and our CEOs that facilitate high level of engagement? What might those be? What do you think are the skills that, thinking about, particularly about the 11 tips on the previous page, what skills do we need to hire for or develop in our leaders and managers? Anybody want to weigh in?
This is Jim Tremaine. One thing I think that's very challenging, both for the employee and for the employer.
I don't want to be the one answering all the time, but I think that if you're going to put somebody in a manager position, there's a couple things that need to be true. One is that they aspire to that. Employers tend to put people in supervisory positions because they're good at what they were doing, which was, quote unquote, their job. And now because they're so good and they're efficient with their time, they push them up into the managerial position, but it's not really their strength. It wasn't what they wanted to do. Though I think the number one skill that a good manager has to have is that if they're going to call somebody a team, they need to understand what team means. And that means that we have to have empathy for the team members. We have to be really, truly listening to them. We have to, I can't look at another employee and say, well, I know exactly how you feel. But I can look at them and say, I know that you must be feeling something. And let's talk about what that is and how do I get you re-engaged and how can I get you going. An employee wants to be able to trust the boss, and to trust the boss has to be human. They have to be willing to share their frailties as well as their strengths. They have to be empathetic. And I think some people will say, well, you can't teach empathy, but you can influence it. And I think that if you look for it in the person you're going to put as a manager, that's number one. And then number two, how do you encourage that? How do you strengthen it?
And Ken, you know, your point is well taken, and Laura kind of agrees with this as well, where she's saying that time management, taking the time, invest in those frequent conversations to feel connected to the employee, so they feel connected to you and the team and the company are all really critical. I think, again, it's having those conversations on a regular basis, which we'll talk about in the engagement interview or the stay interview, makes all the difference of whether people feel listened to, supported, and responded to. Any other skills? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think like the term supervisor, manager, boss is something that's been used forever, right? But I think that being a leader is, you have to have that skill to lead your team, not just manage the day-to-day and help uplift them. And so, you know, not everyone has those skills. And like you said, just because somebody was good at their job doesn't make them a good leader. It makes them good at you know, what they do.
Very good. I think as you said, there is a difference between leading and managing, or being a boss and a supervisor and leading people. And I think not everybody's cut out for that leadership role, which is having a level of engagement and compassion and willingness to invest in employees' experience every day, and not just manage their work, but help lead them into new levels of performance and effectiveness. Well, let's look at the next page of the handouts on page 6.
Jeff, you have one more comment there in chat before we move on, if that's okay. So Jim was sharing, I think one of the most challenging things for employers is a willingness to let employees change roles. When you have a great employee, it's very difficult to let that employee move into a new role, and employees must also be willing to try a new role.
Exactly, and I think that none of us should stay static in our jobs and in our roles, and I think we need to be flexible and open to accommodating emerging skills and talents and passions in our employees, and that's listening to them, having conversations to get a sense of what talents they have that they'd like to express or demonstrate in their work that they're not currently leveraging. Having those conversations, being willing and open to moving people into the right role. And again, Ken earlier talked about the fit and alignment. And if that alignment isn't right, better to have the conversation to kind of take that experience that we've invested in developing and leverage into another role versus having them get frustrated and exiting. So thank you, Jim, for weighing in there. So on page 6 of the handouts that were shared with you at the outset or yesterday, so one of the things that we know, and coming back to the whole idea of leadership, is resonance. And resonance as a leader, where we're in harmony, connecting with the people on the front line, resonance involves instilling hope and vision, so a sense of future and possibility. This is especially true now in the age of COVID-19, is giving people a sense of hope and possibility. Being mindful, present, and attentive. So being present for someone else. So we're not distracted. We're giving them our undivided attention and time. That doesn't mean, 100% of the time to a given employee, but when they say, do you have 5 minutes? We say yes, and we give them those 5 minutes. Or if we don't have the 5 minutes we can give them, we say, well, later in the day, I will be able to be present and attentive to your needs and have a meaningful conversation at that point. Displaying empathy and compassion, appreciating other people's experiences, their concerns, what they're experiencing, what they're going through. That's especially true now as the challenges that we're all facing in our work environments and our companies. And finally, the key element of a resonance is emotionally intelligent. And I'm just going to touch briefly on the whole concept of emotional intelligence, just because it's so critical. And I'll talk a bit about the statistics here in a minute about the power of emotional intelligence. But what does it mean to be emotionally intelligent as a manager or a supervisor, as a leader? It's the ability to understand one's own emotional makeup, understand the emotional makeup of others, and then to effectively manage and regulate one's own emotions and to make good decisions and to act effectively in relation to other people. So it's self-awareness, your own emotional makeup, the emotional other awareness, emotional makeup of other people, and then being able to regulate our own emotional responses, our own decisions, and our actions based upon that insight of our self-awareness and other awareness. You may be very emotionally self-aware, but oblivious to other people's emotional experience. That steals you off from being emotionally intelligent. Or you may be sensitive to other people's emotional states, but are oblivious or blind to your own. And then what happens is that your emotional state will influence your behaviors and your relationships to others, and that erodes your effectiveness. So emotional intelligence is these three pieces: self-awareness, social awareness, and then being able to regulate that self-awareness and your behaviors to adjust to the emotional makeup of yourself and other people. And this is why it's so critical, is that the research is pretty clear that emotional intelligent leaders tend to be about 90% more effective than those who are not. So your ability to be an effective leader is dependent upon your ability to be emotionally intelligent. And so what are the components of emotional intelligence? This is on the bottom of page 6, real brief, and then we're going to move into the last kind of substantive piece, which is really looking at the stay interviews. And the reason we spend as much time on this emotional intelligence is that it's really the factor that influences your ability to be engaged with employees and to ensure that they are fully supported and feel engaged themselves in the work that they do. So if our goal is strong, healthy, and effective relationships, then the 4 components, again, embedded in that definition in the middle of this page, is high degree of self-awareness. What is my emotional state, and how is that influencing my behaviors with others? Self-management, how do I regulate that emotional expression in the appropriate way at the appropriate time to the appropriate people to ensure that my regulation, my managing my emotional self is done in a way that invites people into the conversation rather than puts the people off. Social awareness is being plugged into other people's emotional states. This is especially true when we're looking at someone who's struggling in the job. If we're not aware of that, if we're oblivious to their experiences or their dissatisfaction or their frustrations, that's going to become a barrier to our understanding what we might need to do to help them get re-engaged. So being socially aware enables us to then fundamentally do the right thing, which is how do we manage the relationship more effectively? The whole emotional intelligence is a webinar in and of itself, a workshop in and all of itself. But I want to give you an idea that when we're talking about leadership development, the most fundamental thing we can do is to ensure that our leaders are emotionally intelligent, self-aware, self-managed, socially aware, and then being able to translate all that insight and knowledge into managing those everyday employee reactions. So in the final few minutes here, the last page of the handouts, page 7, and then we'll get into a supplemental handout, are stay or engagement interviews. If we're interested in employee retention, if we want to know what will keep people working for us or how to prevent them from leaving us, we need to really engage in frequent conversations with them to get a better understanding of what their expectations are and what's working or what's not in their everyday work experience. So we can conduct stay interviews with star performers, certainly, with people with essential knowledge and experience, employees identified as high potentials, individuals whose departure might cause others to leave, people identified in a succession plan, All those things are true, but I would also add with all employees. I think that everybody deserves the ability to be heard and understood. And that only benefits us because if we can understand what turns people on, what excites them, what lights their fire, what their hidden talent or latent talents are, what their intentions are long-term and short-term, then we have the ability to influence their choices. When we structure a stay interview, these are some of the things we can explore. Everything from general questions about how is the job going, to how well onboarding and orientation work for them, how is the culture working for them, and so forth. There's lots of dimensions of that potential stay or engagement interview experiences. And I want to just kind of share something else. Let's look at, there's another handout, there we go, that, now it's not the right one. Trying to think here, there it is, sorry about that, here it is. So there's an additional handout, it's called the stay interview. And interview questions. Can you see this here? The 1 through 16? Okay.
Yep, you're all good.
So in the waning minute or so, what's your experience? Have some of you ever done stay interviews? Do you think they might be helpful? And this 16 questions, is this a good place to start? Talk to me about your own experience with stay interviews or engagement interviews.
I will tell you this, we used a form in our interviewing of trying to find out what was going on, but what the owner never did was find out until it was too late that somebody was being recruited. He just turned a blind eye to that. It was like his belief was that you're always going to be loyal, period. I gave you a job, so you were going to be loyal. And the reality was that he lost touch with what was going on. And somewhere along the line, that employee that he thought was going to always be loyal was being heavily recruited outside of the firm. And they left. And I think a stay interview would have brought some of that up. And then the owner could have reacted, or he could have been proactive instead of reactive, trying to save them as they were walking out the door.
Well, that's exactly right. Frequently, by the time people leave, their intention to shift away occurred maybe 6 months or 18 months earlier. And if we could have kind of gotten to them early on, when they start to think about alternatives, we're more likely to kind of retain them as an employee, so maintain their engagement. So that's really critical, that early on, when people give their notice, it's too late. We can't really have that conversation. We can try to kind of keep them. What can I do to get you to stay? But they've already emotionally disconnected. So the earlier that we can find out about their intentions, what's working or what's not, the better experience they're likely to have with us.
Jeff, how often would you recommend conducting stay interviews?
Well, I think that in my experience, I think the ideal would be at least once a year, kind of the deeper dive. But I mean, it goes along with our approach to performance coaching conversations, is that we have these monthly conversations with each employee to say what's working or what's not. And that's a chance to really early on detect a hesitation, a fading of commitment. So while we might do a full-blown engagement interview that uses the 16 questions or some version of them in the handout that I shared with you, you might do that once a year. I also think that on or at least a quarterly basis, if not monthly basis, you're just checking in. You're exploring not only job performance related issues, but also their level of engagement. They're a kind of a separate part of the conversation. So you're going to talk about maybe what's working or what's not in terms of job performance, but also what's working and what's not in their relationship with you and the relationship to the job, to the team, to the company, where they want to go, the longer term future. Again, some of that's going to be that annual engagement interview, but I think it's reasonable to kind of touch base on some of those questions on a monthly or quarterly basis. So we're going to wrap things up. I know we're out of time. So the stay interview helps both retain the specific employee and also build a quality work environment at the same time. So you can learn not only how to retain or engage a given employee, but also says, you know, I can be doing some additional things to help generally create a better work environment for all employees. The master doesn't talk, he acts. And when his work is done, the people say, amazing, we did it all by ourselves. And then finally, some cause happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go. Sometimes retention isn't really what we need in a given employee. Most of the time we hire right and we want to retain them. Sometimes they bring us happiness when they leave. Thank you for being a part of this session. I hope it was helpful to you. Feel free to check out our website for additional information on our consulting and training services. And I'll turn it back to you, Kristen.
Yeah, I just would like to say thank you as well for everyone for joining us. And one final shout out again to our sponsors for this programming lineup. Thank you to TDS, to H. Krueger and Associates, Park Bank, and Madison College. In the chat, I did put a link to a survey for this session. If you guys have a few minutes to fill that out, that would be helpful. Doesn't look like it's a clickable link. So after the session today, I'll send you guys all a follow-up email that will include the link to this recording, as well as that survey again. And then I just want to kind of plug an event we're actually doing later today. So 1 o'clock today, we're doing a panel discussion on COVID-19 financial relief for businesses. So we have someone from the Small Business Administration coming. We have a representative from the financial institution or banking world. And then we also have a CPA joining us. So that session is at 1 o'clock today. And if you'd like to register for it, you can do so on the chamber website. So thank you guys all for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.